All right, are you ready for a rematch? I've got two of the most popular fire pits out there, the Solo Stove Bonfire and the Breeo Y Series. We're gonna put them head to head to see who comes out on top. Let's get to it. What's up guys, Eric here with At Home in the Future. We check out the latest gear and gadgets for life's adventures. Hey, before we get going with this head-to-head, I want to let you know that both of these companies have sent me stuff to check out over time, but that in no way influences the stuff I'm going to say in this video, but I just want you to know that up front, so let's get going. So whether you watch my original head-to-head or maybe you're just starting with this one today, you're probably in the market for a fire pit and you're probably wondering, why am I comparing these two models? And that's fairly easy. It's because I think they are the most popular fire pits out there. Obviously, fire pits have been around for ages. There are a ton of options you can go with, as you probably already know. I've been through, I feel like, absolutely all of them myself. We've done the thing where we build a fire pit back in the backyard in our woods, which is great. Really cool, but super, super smoky. We've done like the classic low to the ground metal fire pit special that maybe you get like at a hardware store where it's just the big open disc where you put in logs over time, and after a season it's just like a rusty mess where you're having to get a new one every year. A few years ago, these smokeless fire pits kind of came into the scene and kind of took the world by storm. So I feel like these are the fire pits that I see all over the place, and for good reason. They are super convenient, they burn wood like nobody's business, and they tend to be fairly smokeless, which kind of eliminates that thing where you're moving around the fire and it seems like the smoke's always coming in your eyes. These fire pits kind of get around that. So today we're going to be taking a look at the two most popular options in the market. Now this is a little bit different of a marketplace than it was a few years ago when I did my first head-to-head, because I feel like there are dozens of options out there now, but I still feel like these are the two best. These are the two options I see the most, and these are the options I feel like I'm debating the most when I'm out camping or hanging out with the guys grilling or something like that. So today we're going to take a look at the classic Solo Stove Bonfire and the brand new Breeo Y Series, which brings some really interesting things to the table. So let's get started with a comparison of what they both have in common. These are the two fire pits we're going to compare in this video, the Solo Stove Bonfire and the brand new to the market Breeo Series Y. Before we start going over all the things that make these things different, how they function differently and everything, I want to talk about the stuff that they actually have in common. The first thing on that list is that both of these are considered to be 19-inch fire pits. So they both, the surface inside, the barrel inside these things, both measures about 19 inches. Now, the Solo Stove from edge to edge is about 19.5 inches. The Breeo is about 21 inches, mostly because this lip, it kind of has this plate up here at the top that makes it just a tiny bit wider. But as far as heights and stuff go, the Solo Stove at its smallest, that means you take this little lid that pops off here, this kind of funnels the flames up. But if you take that off, this thing measures 14 inches total. The Breeo, when you collapse its legs, which we'll talk about that feature here in a little bit, it measures only 11.5 inches tall, so it's a little bit shorter, a little bit easier to get around. So if you set both of these up at their normal use heights, right now I'm kind of sitting on uneven land, so I don't have the ring that normally goes below the Solo Stove, the little stand that you use to prop it up. But both of them are pretty similar in height when they're set up that way. The Solo Stove with the ring and everything, and the ring below it, comes in at about 17.5 inches, and the Breeo comes in at 15 inches. But then the Breeo can also go up to another height if you want to use it to cook or to stand around or that sort of thing, and that actually comes in around 21.5 inches, so quite a bit higher if you use that taller setting there. Similarity number two is they claim to both be totally smokeless. Now, are they totally smokeless? No. If you've ever used one of these pits, when you get them started up and everything, they kind of smoke like normal. That smokeless feature doesn't really kick in until you get that secondary burn, and that's actually similarity number three, is both of these work with a secondary burn system where they take in air through the bottom, they push it out through the top and the holes in each one of those, and that's what produces that really interesting kind of nice wavy fire effect, but it's also what eliminates most of the smoke from these. It's what keeps all that smoke from getting out of your eyes or making your clothes stink at night. That's a really cool feature of this type of fire pit. Similarity number four, and the final thing I'll mention here, is they both have very similar heat output. If you've ever used one of these smokeless fire pits, you know that most of the heat from these kind of goes up in a cone shape, up and out in a cone shape. Doesn't matter which one of these you're using, they both kind of work the same way. Now, if you're used to a fire pit that's, you know, on the ground, it's a typical campfire, even one of the more raised fire beds, you know that heat from that tends to go more out to the sides and can keep you a lot more warm. While these will keep you warm and they're nice to have outside during some colder months, if you live in a really cold climate and you're hoping that these will keep you like super, super warm on a really cold day, maybe you live way up north or something where you depend on these for like a ton of heat, this may not be the kind of fire pit you want, but both of these work the same way. They'll keep you warm in some cool weather, but maybe not super cold weather. All right, we've talked about the similarities. Let's talk about what makes these things different. How do they perform against each other? What features do they have that one has that the other doesn't have? And let's get things started with build quality. And I think there actually is a pretty big distinction here between these two pits. The big difference is the Solo Stove to me feels very mass produced. It's nice. That's not a bad thing. It feels very well put together. You don't really see any seams or anything. The Breeo is very obviously made by hand of thicker, sturdier materials. So you're going to see weld marks inside of it. You're going to see where they've rolled the steel. It feels less like a soup can kind of approach like this does, where the bottom just looks like it's a single piece, and more like something that was put together of different pieces over time. Something else that's immediately obvious is the type of steel that's used in both of these. So they both claim 304 stainless steel. Solo Stove on the website says 304 stainless, and then in some listings it just says stainless steel. So you don't see that steel featured throughout the product, which is important because that means parts of it may be more prone to rust over time. The Breeo is very specific and very proud of the fact that they are built from 304 stainless steel that's actually sourced in the USA, and that's the kind of steel that's used throughout the entire product. So you can tell, and it's a little bit heavier too, but you can tell this thing is built like an absolute tank. The Solo Stove is no slouch. It doesn't feel like it's poorly built or anything, but you can tell the walls in this are thicker and it can take a lot more abuse. One other big distinguishing feature that I know is important to a lot of you guys, judging from the comments in the last video. The Solo Stove is a mass-produced product that comes from China. The Breeo is handmade in the USA. I think it's Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and they're super proud of that, and they should be. It's rare to see a product like this these days actually where all the stuff is sourced and built by hand in the USA, so that's a very cool thing that may draw you more to the Breeo too. And before we leave this section of the head-to-head, I think it's super important to mention the warranty for these. Now, both of them claim to have a lifetime warranty. I did notice on Solo Stove's website that it says that it's a lifetime warranty free from defect, so not necessarily from rust or anything like that. Breeo is the same thing, lifetime warranty. They're really proud of it, but they also have in their fine print that the Breeo actually has a 5-year warranty from rust of any kind. So I have lots of friends who have both of these fire pits, especially the people that have Solo Stoves. I haven't in the wild seen a whole lot of rust or anything. I know if you look that up in some forums, you see that. Because of the 304 stainless steel used here, you're probably gonna encounter rust a whole lot less, but it is super comforting knowing that they wanna guarantee you from 5 years of protection against rust. So even if you're super, super hard on this and go crazy with this thing, I think you can have a little bit more peace of mind that this is gonna be more weather resistant in the long run. Let's move on to the part of the head-to-head that you probably care about the most in this video, and that is, how do both of these perform? How do they perform in comparison to each other? We'll start again with what's similar, and they both do a really good job of that secondary burn that makes these smokeless fire pits so good. Like I mentioned before, they both take in air through the bottom, push about the holes in the top. It gets that nice kind of smoke-free feel. They both did an excellent job of that, and I've noticed with both of these, it's pretty easy to get fires going. It's pretty easy to keep them going, and they both just chew through wood like nobody's business. If you've never had a fire pit like this, that's one of the things you need to know is you're going to want a lot of wood because you keep feeding logs, and that secondary burn is so efficient that, man, like in just a few minutes those logs are totally gone. I did notice that the Breeo tends to have a much more powerful burn, and I don't really know a good explanation for that besides the fact that I think it actually takes in more air at the bottom. It has more holes throughout the sides, and it has holes actually on the bottom, and then the Y inside I think is just pulling a lot more air through, even though the holes at the top are less than you'd see in the Solo Stove. Now, the Solo Stove is no slouch at pulling air through, but over time I think the ash builds up a little bit more in that pan, and we'll talk more about how those pans work here in a second. But I think it's a little bit easier a lot of times to get air in the Breeo than it was for me in the Solo Stove. Now, the Solo Stove I think does make for a prettier fire pit experience as far as the secondary burn goes. You may not be able to see at this angle, but the holes in this, there's a lot more of them and they're a lot closer together, where in the Breeo they're bigger but more spread out. But that really pretty kind of slow motion fire that's mesmerizing, that effect does look a little bit more prominent on the Solo Stove. Still looks great in the Breeo, but that's something where if you really like that look, you may like how the Solo Stove looks. Now, both of these make for a great fire pit experience where you pull up your chair and just roast some marshmallows and do all the great fire pit things. I do think, we'll talk more about this in a second too in the versatility category, but I do think the Breeo has more options because of this expansion system with the legs. We'll give you a little bit of a better look at this here in a little bit, but being able to push these pins down and expand the legs up where you get a higher position. It's meant more, I think, for cooking, but I found that it's really great if you're just standing around with the guys outside talking. You can still stand around the Solo Stove, but something about standing around the Breeo where it has that higher position is just a nicer experience. The heat comes up more on your midsection, it's easier to poke the logs, and it's just an extra feature that I've really appreciated in the Series Y. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the versatility of both of these, because I think there are some important distinctions here. Like I was just talking about with the Breeo, it has these new legs that can pack down, where if you want to pack this thing small and throw it in the back of a truck, it's really easy to do that. I love that they can, like I said, expand all the way where you can stand around it, but because of that high position, the Breeo is kind of designed with some cooking in mind, so you don't have to slouch over if you're trying to pair it with the grill. They do have this really interesting outpost grill attachment here, which has this pull that you can slide into the back, slide this grill on, then you can rotate it to the side, get the height right and everything like that. It's really kind of designed with cooking in mind, which I think is the entire point of having those legs on there. Although I found those a lot more useful in other scenarios. But that's a really cool thing you can do with the Breeo. The Solo Stove, new to their line the last year or so, they've added a lot of cooking options where they have a rack you can put on it, a griddle system, a grill system that goes with that. It works a little bit differently where it sits actually on top of the fire pit instead of on a rod. So you may have a little bit less flexibility as far as wanting food to cool off, being able to swivel it and that sort of thing. And it is kind of pricey. Really both options are a little pricey too, just depends on if you're into those or not. But there's some versatility there if you want to cook on either of these. Of course, cooking stuff is just kind of the tip of the iceberg as far as accessories go for these fire pits. Breeo, of course, has covers. They've got that cooking system. They've got kettles and stuff you could put on. Solo Stove has just a huge selection of things you can get for this thing. Again, that's an area where I think they've really expanded the last few years. Two standouts on the Solo Stove side that I've really enjoyed over the years consistently, again, are these fire pit tools, just your simple poker and log mover. These things have seen a lot of action over the last few years, and I've had a ton of different tools for messing with fires over time. The Solo Stove options for this are absolutely the best, so be sure to check those out, even if this isn't the fire pit that you choose. The other thing I really enjoy on the Solo Stove side, they make a really good pack of fire roasting sticks that actually unscrew at the middle and screw together. But these actually live in like our camping crate. Even if I'm not taking the fire pit with me, I really like these around just to have around at the campground. Pretty much any sort of accessories you want for either of these, you can find them, so lots of options online. So cleanup's a big part of the discussion when you're considering a fire pit like this, and honestly both of these work kind of the same way. So the Breeo, because it has that handle on its side, you can just pick it up pretty easily with that handle, flip it over, shake the ash out. They also make a pretty cool accessory that's just this ash scooper. It's actually for some of their other fire pits, but I found this handy to scoop out after the fact if I was just going to leave it in place and don't want to, walk over somewhere and carry the whole thing with me. The Solo Stove, this is actually the 1.0 model of the Bonfire, which you would in turn just tip over and get the ash out, kind of shake it out. The 2.0 model, which was just released, I think the one characteristic that thing has is that it has a removable ash pan with a removable grate over the top. So that makes cleanup a lot easier on that, where you're just lifting up one part instead of carrying the whole thing over and dumping it out. As far as cleanup goes, especially if you have the 2.0 version of the Bonfire, I think they're both kind of evenly matched. So before we leave the versatility section, I want to talk about portability, because that's where things actually get fairly interesting with these fire pits. So no other accessories factored in. The Solo Stove itself weighs just over 23 pounds, and the Breeo Series Y comes in at 30 pounds, which sounds like a no-brainer. Oh, this thing will be a lot easier to carry around, right? I don't think that's the case. Because the Breeo, the legs condense down, and because of this handle on the front, when you actually pick this thing up, condense down, when you're carrying it, the handle close to your side, I think it's much easier to carry around than it would be to carry either of these where you just have them in front of you like you're holding a big pot or something. Again, this one's a tiny bit heavier, but that handle goes a long way. Now I know that Solo Stove does make a handle attachment for theirs that somehow plugs into the secondary burn holes in the top. But even with that factored in, that handle is going to sit kind of in the middle of that width where it's going to sit further out from your body, and this sits a little bit closer in because it's laying on its side. So I find the Breeo a lot easier to carry around, which is something I wasn't expecting. Okay, the final point of comparison here before we move on to our conclusion is the cost. How close are these to each other? Is there a big gulf between them? Now, when you look at MSRPs on both of these, they're super, super close actually. The Breeo comes in at $495 as the time of this video, and the Solo Stove Bonfire with the stand, the MSRP is like $465. So not much difference between them. But Solo Stove, I feel like, is constantly having a sale on their models. I don't know why that is. It may just be a marketing strategy, but I feel like I consistently see the Bonfire for just around the $300 mark or so, which makes the Breeo without a similar sale price a little bit more expensive. Now you have to factor in what's involved with that. So there's a difference in warranties, there's a difference in where both of these are made, and of course a difference in features and versatility and that sort of thing. So you may want to factor that into your decision. But if cost is the only thing that matters to you, I feel like I see the Solo Stove for a lot cheaper fairly often. And frankly, a ton of Solo Stove knockoffs you can find in a lot of different department stores. I even saw one in Kohl's the other day for really, really cheap. I probably wouldn't go with one of those because I don't think the materials are as good, but this is definitely going to be a less expensive option. All right, we've gone through all the features, we've done pros and cons, we talk about how they compare and contrast. Which one of these fire pits do I think is right for you? I think in this comparison, the choice is a little bit more clear than it was last time around. Here's what I would do. If you're only going to take this fire pit out a few times a season, and maybe you're putting it in a place where you have a lot of control over the weather and the exposure, that sort of thing, I think the Solo Stove Bonfire is a really good choice, and that's because it's typically less expensive with all the sales and stuff that you see online, and it's a great fire pit. We've really enjoyed our Solo Stove models over the year. They make a great fire, and it's always fun to sit around them. But if you're going to use your fire pit on a regular basis, if you plan to leave it outside or don't want to worry about weather, if you want a lot more versatility and a lot more flexibility with what you can do with the thing, I think it's worth spending a little bit more in getting that made in the USA Breeo Y Series. I think the build quality is higher. I think it actually produces a stronger fire over time. I think it's a ton easier to take care of. That no rust guarantee for 5 years, that gives me a lot of peace of mind and everything. And I just like being able to leave something out and not stress about it and still get the same result I would with the other models. So I think this time around, that's the clear choice for me, and that's the fire pit I'm going to keep in my own backyard. With that said, you really can't make a bad choice as long as you keep the pros and cons in mind of both of those fire pits. And if you want to pick up one of these, be sure to check out the links I mentioned throughout the video. They'll also be down in the description. If you use those, it helps the channel out a ton, and I always try to find the best price for you guys and the best coupon codes and stuff, so keep an eye in the description for all that info. All right, that's it for this video. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Be sure to let me know down in the comments, and if the last video is any indication, I know that you will. I feel like I got comments every single day of people fighting it out, and it's always fun to check those things out, so be sure to comment. Hey, as always, if you dug this video, be sure to hit the like button and be sure to subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. We'll see you next time.